Uh, Good morning. It's my pleasure to welcome Suzy Sorensen, who is our speaker at today's forum. Suzy is a Twin Cities-based registered dietitian and certified diabetes care and education specialist who holds a certificate of training in vegetarian nutrition from the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. From her work as a registered dietitian, Suzy understands just how powerful our food choices can be. She works with individuals, families, and communities to encourage dietary choices that promote human health, support a healthy environment, and embrace compassion. She has served at the state and national level for the Vegetarian Nutrition Dietetic Practice Group and is the co-chairperson for the National Plant-Based Nutrition Community of Interest at the Association of Diabetes Care and Education Specialists. Suzy works in the Fairview system as a diabetes educator, and since 2009 has had her own private practice, Move to Veg Nutrition Counseling, focused on plant-based eating. In her free time, Suzy is a foster cat mom and an avid sci-fi fantasy reader. She tells us that she actually hasn't slept for 3 months since the current foster kitten likes to sleep on Suzy's head. Suzy loves to travel and be outside where it's warm. This winter, you can find her cheering for UND Fighting Hawks hockey or playing her didgeridoo. So please join me in welcoming Suzy to our Plymouth Sunday Forum.
Thank you so much, Dave. I appreciate being here. This presentation has been about 2 years in the coming. Jan and I were planning before COVID, and we postponed with wishful thinking, but I think we decided we should just move ahead. So I appreciate being here. I'll share my screen. I'll offer some information here. Let's see. I'll run through a PowerPoint, and then I think we'll do questions if I understand from Rebecca. So
right, and I just wanted to remind everyone if they do have questions to use the Q&A option, and we'll address those at the end of the talk. So thank you so much.
Let's see. Here comes the technology piece. Here we go, and we'll get to the slide view. There we go. Well, I'm excited to be here today to share some information that Jan asked me long ago to talk about our powerful plate, the choices that we make around the food that we eat, and the positive benefits of plant-based eating, of which there are many. So we'll run through some of those today. The first bit of our talk will be about some of the whys around considering plant-based eating and its benefits. And the last half of the presentation will be about how to think about maybe moving in that direction or making that change. So plant-based eating is a little bit vague, honestly. It means different things to different people. It's not well defined, but I think to most of us, it would imply that meals are composed primarily of plant foods as the foundation of the meal, fruits and veggies, grains, and legumes. Well, that plant-based is a little vague. There are some real definitions we have that give us a better insight into someone's food choices. So you'll hear us talk today about vegan meal patterns and meal plans. And a vegan meal pattern just means no animal products, no eggs, dairy, meat. A vegetarian meal pattern is somebody who eats all plants, but might add some dairy or some egg to their intake. Pescatarian is when we hear about sometimes people who say, I don't eat other meat, but I do eat fish, along with perhaps dairy and eggs. And then we're seeing more and more of what we would call a flexitarian or semi-vegetarian meal pattern, where people say, I'm willing to occasionally eat meat, but not every day, or not if I don't know where it came from. So there's a lot more awareness, and there are some actual definitions that help us, especially as we're working in the nutrition community with meeting someone's needs. Vegetarianism and veganism are on the rise. It depends exactly whose data you look at, but there are approximately, let's call 8.5 million American, well, 7.5 million Americans who identify themselves as vegetarian, no meat, mostly plants, perhaps a little dairy or egg. And then another million in the US who call themselves vegans, no animal product in their diet. Interestingly, as they poll people and survey people, they found about 23 million additional folks say that they follow a vegetarian inclined diet. And that might be those semi-vegetarians or flexitarians, really trying to use plants as the foundation, and maybe includes occasionally some animal product. So I think what we're seeing is a rise in the numbers. It's a little challenging to survey, and they do it only every few years, but definitely we're seeing a rise in Google searches and participants in something like Veganuary, which is an effort in January to try to eat vegan, January and beyond. More and more participants worldwide participating in these kind of efforts. The data certainly show that veganism in particular is on the rise as the awareness of the impact of our food choices on the world around us increases. So if you're thinking about eating plant-based, you're not alone. A lot of people I talk to say they've watched Game Changers or Cowspiracy, or they've read How Not to Die, or some other book talking about the benefits and the impacts of the food that we eat. So why would somebody choose to eat plant-based? And that's the first part of our presentation today. PETA, People for Ethical Treatment of Animals, did a survey actually some years ago now, and they broke it out a little more. But the main reasons that people are looking at plant-based, vegetarian or vegan eating is to protect the environment, to protect their own health, and for compassionate reasons. So I will touch on each of these motivations during the first part of our talk today, just to give you an overview of why these are considerations for making dietary changes. Any one of these, the environmental impact of food choices, health impacts, could be a day or two long summary or seminar on its own. So we are really boiling it down here. I will hope to offer, or my intent is to offer some tidbits and maybe some teasers and some factoids, and encourage you that if you see something that's interesting to you or you'd like to learn more about, that you pursue it and dig a little deeper. So we definitely are covering the surface today. I do want to say that there are a couple of images that are not pleasant. They're not graphic, but they are animals living on unpleasant farm conditions. So just a heads up there as we talk about environment and compassion. Again, nothing real graphic, but just not happy animals sometimes. So let's start talking about the environmental impact of our food choices. This is what we call a factory farm. All of my grandparents grew up on farms in Iowa, and they would not recognize today's industrial agriculture setting. This is factory farming, industrial ag, and there may be thousands of animals inside each of those buildings, under each of those roofs. If we buy from a grocery store, we buy a pound of hamburger, we buy a pack of chicken, we buy a dozen eggs, most likely this is the environment that the animals lived in before we used their product. So thousands of animals lived their shortened lives in these small confined spaces, and this is what we call factory farming or industrial ag. The water that you see there, a couple of spots, are what we call manure lagoons. It's not tropical. It's just what it sounds like. With this many animals, we need a place for the waste to go. So when we think about the environmental impact of choosing to eat animals on these that come from these industrial settings, interestingly, the Environmental Protection Agency says that the waste generated by these animals on factory farms has polluted over 35,000 miles, at least now, of rivers and contaminated groundwater in at least 17 states. The numbers are very dynamic and change as the research happens. But the short story is that they say that the runoff from factory farms pollutes our waterways more than all other industrial sources combined. So there are fish kills, there are contaminated beaches, contaminated waterways. As a result of this degree of industrialization of farming. It probably won't surprise you to hear that one dairy cow, I think pictured here, produces at least 20 times as much waste each day as one human does. And that the numbers are kind of staggering. The animals raised for food, whether it's hogs, cows, and so on, produce about 89,000 pounds of waste each second. It has to go somewhere. So runoff like this, cracks or leaks in those manure lagoons, rain and flooding and overflow can result in contamination of the land and in particular our water supply. So again, the numbers are a little hard to get our heads around sometimes, but lots of animals and lots of waste. We think about conserving our resources. Water is one of the things that a lot of environmentally concerned folks are thinking about. Of all water used for all purposes in the United States, greater than half of it goes toward livestock production in one way or another. There's some interesting research and studies out there. Again, the numbers may vary slightly depending on exactly whose study we're reading about, but generally speaking, to produce a pound of wheat requires about 25 gallons of water. And to produce a pound of meat, about 2,500 gallons of water, everything from hydration to machine cleaning, cleaning and processing meat and so on. So quite a difference in the water usage. And again, the information is out there comparing different crops to different animal product. We think about other resources, including fossil fuels. This is, to me, kind of an understandable 320 calories of rice and veggies, which is about 3.5 cups, compared to 320 calories of beef steak or meat, measured in gallons of gas equivalent. Is how they measure these things. Takes about 16 times more fossil fuels to produce the steak. Again, through providing habitation for the animal, processing, caring for, and so on. So a much greater use of fossil fuels to produce meat, along with a much greater use of water compared to growing plants. Besides water and fossil fuel, air quality is something that's getting a lot of talk. It's not new, but what you see here in the photo is what we call a CAFO, C-A-F-O, a concentrated animal feeding operation or a feedlot. You can see there's no grass or shelter for the animals. And again, large numbers of animals in a small amount of space, waiting to go to market or to go to slaughter. When we have a lot of animals in a little space, their waste and the gas that they generate is great. Particularly gases like ammonia, hydrogen sulfide, methane, and nitrous oxide. A lot of these are even more potent than carbon dioxide that we hear so much about in the instance of global warming. So from climate change, these operations are big contributors to air quality in the communities around. So the same is true with the manure lagoons that we saw earlier. They give off ammonia and other gases that can be so powerful that they overcome people working nearby. So there have been accidents and deaths resulting from this degree of greenhouse gases given off in different settings. Also in a feedlot like this, the dirt kicked up, feces particles, skin particles, and hair in the air are not good for the people who are working there or the communities nearby. So it has an effect not just on animals, but on the people in that setting too. A little more about just conserving our resources. This is something that's, again, it's not new, but we're hearing more about. A study from the Yale School of Forestry suggests that 80% of the Amazon rainforest, and this is Brazil that you see, 80% of the Amazon rainforest is being cut down or cleared for more pasture land. Because if we can grow pasture, we can raise cattle for beef, for people to eat in other places in the world. About 60% of the rainforest is in Brazil, and they are really clearing quickly. One study said that about 33% increase in deforestation of the Amazon in the first half of 2021 compared to the first half of 2020. So it's happening at an accelerating rate, either cut or burn. So we're losing that rainforest, which affects our climate. It affects our Earth's ability or the world's ability to absorb some CO2, produce oxygen, along with concerns about extinction of species here. So a lot going on with deforestation and changes to the planet around influences of animal agriculture. So that's a little about the environment. And so again, the idea here is that if I can decrease my demand for dairy, meat, I can decrease my contribution to deforestation, river runoff, air pollution, and so on. By decreasing my intake, I can not contribute as greatly to these concerns or these issues and problems. So there's a little about environment. Like I said, it's just a teaser almost. Any one of these you could read a lot more about. And I hope you will if you're interested there. I'm going to jump to compassion. And this was for me the driving force. I became vegetarian and then vegan after I was a dietitian for compassionate reasons. Approximately 1,000 animal lives are saved every year by each person who chooses a vegan meal pattern. As I came to know some animals like this turkey on a sanctuary and discover their personalities and their natural lives, I didn't want to participate in eating animals anymore. So when we think about compassion, these are just some numbers. And again, they're kind of staggering, but about approximately, and again, this is changing all the time, but about 321 animals killed every second in the United States for food. Whether it's pigs, cows, chickens, fish, all of these contribute to the numbers that are just staggering. And in the United States, about 10 million animals every year, greater than the entire population of the earth, or now about the entire population of the earth's people worth of animals are killed every year for food consumption. When we think about the lives that these animals used for food product live, this is pretty typical. In fact, this is a picture from Minnesota. These are egg laying hens, and the hens lay about in an operation like this about 300 eggs a year, which is 5 times more than they normally would in a natural environment to raise chicks. They're bred to lay more, and they're artificially stimulated to lay more eggs through by turning off the lights, living in the dark, and then turning the lights back on to kind of interrupt their cycle or interfere with their cycles of egg laying. But they're packed into these battery cages where they're super close together. Heads and feet can get caught in the wire, and then animals can starve or get trampled by their cage mates. They are some competitive, and in a stressful environment like this could peck each other. So most often chickens are de-beaked, which is just what it sounds like, before being put in here. And then they lay eggs, which roll into those troughs and roll down. So also in the egg industry, as in the dairy industry, of course, the male chicks aren't needed. So they're disposed of. They just need the chickens, not the roosters for egg laying. And again, the numbers are just staggering of how many chickens are killed each year for meat, and when they're spent, they can no longer lay eggs. From one more note on compassion, here's the dairy. I don't know if I can even read that number out loud, but the pounds of milk produced by the 9 million dairy cows in the United States. Again, they're bred to produce 10 times more than their normal amount that their body would make to feed a calf. By repeated impregnating, the baby calf is born so that the mother cows are lactating or producing milk that we drink instead of their babies. Female calves are kept to go into the operation, and male calves are not needed. So they go to veal crates, typically, commonly. So again, I think the general message here is that when we're consuming these products, dairy products, eggs, and meat, we are contributing to these animals suffering, not being permitted to live their natural lives. They're not on the grass, they're not in the woods, they're not nurturing their young. They aren't forming relationships as they normally would. So this is why I chose to eat a plant-based meal plan. I just kind of don't want to be a part of that suffering. Another note on compassion is it's not just about the animals. A lot of information too about the role of the human condition as part of a world community. This blurb comes from one of the professors at Cornell, that if all the grain currently fed to livestock in the United States was directly consumed by people, we could feed 800 million hungry people in the world. Not that they would necessarily eat those exact grains, but if we grew grain to directly feed people instead of feeding animals who are then fed to people, it's much more efficient. So from a world hunger and a world resource perspective, there are considerations for not eating the animals, but just growing the plants. Some other interesting information that came out during COVID, right, about the US Department of Labor says that meat packing is the most dangerous job in the United States. Think about if you're working with large animals who don't want to go down a chute, come off a truck, go into the slaughter line, and they put up a fight. There are dangers there, along with during the slaughter process, feces, blood, bacteria, and so on can be sprayed or spread. And so there are risks there. It came up, I think, an increased awareness, especially during COVID, when meat packers, the discussion about, are they essential workers? And we read about workers being forced to stay on the line, even when they were sick, they were not able to distance, and so on. So it's not just about compassion or caring for the animals, it's also about being part of that world community. So again, lots more on any of these topics, and I'm kind of sharing what I've learned over time and learned from speaking with others who are experts in this area. My area of expertise lies here on the health benefits of plant-based eating. Again, as David said, as a registered dietitian and a diabetes care specialist, I see every day the power, positive or negative, the influence of the food that we eat. This is a statement from the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. They do what we call a meta-analysis. They look at all the research and the best reliable, repeatable studies and what they showed. And they say that studies indicate that vegetarians in this particular analysis have lower morbidity and mortality and a reduced risk for obesity, heart disease, hypertension, diabetes, and even some types of cancer. So the health benefits are profound. And I'll touch on just a little bit of the data from each of those areas, the weight, heart, cancer, and diabetes. And again, this is not intended to be specific individualized medical advice, but just sharing some of the really great research that's coming out around the health benefits of choosing to eat a plant-based, particularly vegan or vegetarian meal plan. This is a healthy weight. It's a map showing what you see is the red states, 35% or more of their state population is obese. And that's just for my height, how much do I weigh? That's how we determine levels. Colorado at this point in time is the only state, the lowest state, less than 25% of their population obese. And we know that obesity rates in the United States have reached what we consider an epidemic level. 1 of every 3 Americans across age now, including children, is obese. And we know that obesity has increased by about 70% in the US over the last 30 years. That extra weight is associated with risk of type 2 diabetes, hypertension, stroke, and some cancers. So the research out there suggests that having a low body weight without being underweight has the least health risk. Here's one study from Adventist Health Study 2. This study included 96,000 people from the US and Canada. And they looked at their meal patterns. And in this research, this is their body mass index. Again, weight for height. 25, a BMI of 25 or higher is considered overweight. And what you see here is that in this research study of 96,000 people, the people who were eating a vegan meal pattern were the only ones who were not overweight. Their BMI was under 25. We get into vegetarian and pescatarian, semi-vegetarian. The more meat or animal product added, the heavier the weight. And that is consistent with other research. I've worked with patients who have lost, the most I've ever seen was 22 pounds in 3 weeks weight loss, switching from kind of standard American meal plan to a low-fat, plant-based whole foods meal pattern. But it's not unusual to see 7 to 15 pound loss in a month on a low-fat, whole foods, plant-based meal plan. And that, again, that's consistent with the research. So the short story is that following a vegan meal pattern is one effective way to achieve and hopefully maintain a healthy weight. So if we think about other health factors in the US, and David will let us know if this is still true. Last I saw, cardiovascular disease or disease of our heart and blood vessels is the leading cause of death in the United States. That's not true around the world, where cancer is the leading cause of death in most countries. But for our country, heart disease. And the reading I've done here is that one factor, there are many, including family histories and other things, but one factor that we use to kind of assess heart health risk is high cholesterol. And there are some big studies, again, these meta-analysis where they gather data from research around the world. Average cholesterol of a meat eater is 210. In this, I think, was Epic Oxford study. Vegetarian, total cholesterol average 161, and the vegan total cholesterol average is 133. The target is to have a cholesterol less than 200. And the research suggests that the risk of heart disease in vegetarians compared to meat eaters is only half. It's about 50%. A lot of good research out here. And a lot of patients I work with, this is what they're hoping for: improved heart health. Another little tidbit on heart health is that high blood pressure is very prevalent. It can increase risk for stroke, heart attack, congestive heart failure, renal, kidney issues. Compared to meat eaters, vegetarians have, again, only about half the risk of developing high blood pressure. Vegans only about a quarter of the risk, or they decrease their risk by about 75% by eating an entirely plant-based meal pattern. Again, there are other factors, family histories and so on, but there's definitely health benefits. When we think about cancer risk, which a lot of us are experience in our families or friends or personal lives, the American Institute for Cancer Research says that diet is the single most important factor in cancer prevention. Again, there are familial or hereditary things going on, but overall studies show a significant reduction in cancer risk among those who avoid meat. Harvard has done a lot of the research around dairy in particular, and colon cancers and very specific cancers. Their studies have suggested that a meat eater has about 3 times the risk of colon cancer compared to those who rarely eat meat, and the same with dairy. Harvard studies show that a high intake of dairy can increase at least double the risk for prostate cancer and possibly increase the risk for ovarian. So a lot of research going on in the nutrition world. Patients often say it's frustrating, we keep getting mixed messages, and it can be difficult to translate the science into nutrition advice, but we always want to use the most up-to-date, relevant, well-done research to make our recommendations. So along that line, American Institute for Cancer Research does a lot to look at cancer risk reduction, recurrence reduction. And their advice is to eat a wide variety of plants, fruits, veggies, whole grains, and beans or legumes. They say fill at least 2/3 of the plate with plant products, and then limit red meat and totally avoid processed meat. Processed meats would be like brats, cured meats like bacon, sausage, and so on. One of their other recommendations is, again, to be as lean as possible without being underweight to decrease risk reduction. And they recommend, along with the other cholesterol and heart healthy information and the diabetes information I'll present here momentarily, but what's really recommended is, as much as possible, really a whole foods plant-based meal plan, and we'll talk more about that when we get to the what to eat section, which is right around the corner. So lastly, this is the near and dear to my heart: diabetes care and education. And this is, again, that Adventist Health Study to 96,000 people in the study. This was their self-reported incidence of type 2 diabetes. And what you see here is that the people who were eating vegetarian and vegan had less than half the risk of those following a standard American meal plan, or even a semi-vegetarian meal plan. You can see that as we add fish and other animal product, the risk goes up. What we know about this, and I share with my patients, is it turns out that for most people, it's the fat that is eaten that causes type 2 diabetes. And so by following a whole foods plant-based meal pattern without added fat, it can allow the body to do some repair and healing. So the chances are much less. Or we use it as a treatment for type 2. This is one more little tidbit about diabetes. If you know anything about that, this is hemoglobin A1C, which is the reading or an indicator of the past 3 months of blood glucose carb controlled and calorie controlled. And what you see is that if you look at the left hand column there, people decreased their A1C following the American Diabetes Association meal plan. They decreased their blood glucose over about 22 weeks from about 7.9, or their A1C from 7.9% to 7.5%. The blue line, the experimental group in this study ate a vegan, whole foods, no added fat meal plan. They dropped their A1C from 8.1% to 6.8% in 22 weeks with no portion control. They ate as much as they wanted, but only plants. So some really fantastic research allowing for recommendations for diabetes care here. Couple other tidbits, and we actually talked about this just a minute before the talk started, but inflammation is related to many chronic health conditions, and vegetarian meal plans can be very helpful in reducing arthritis, neuropathy, diabetes, and so on, including COVID, some new research on COVID. So, excuse me. What we've seen is that the evidence for plant-based eating is great for thinking about healthy weight, cardiovascular risk, cancer and diabetes risk, and inflammation. Let's talk about how to get these great results. This is a common sense caution. One of the things we're seeing is that vegan foods now are really replacing, like, let's not call these health foods. They're no animals were harmed in the making. A little easier on the environment, but these are still a little bit greasy, no fiber, not a lot of vitamins and minerals, but they're out there, for game day, that kind of thing. What we really want to do if we want to eat plant-based or make this shift is choose mostly whole foods, fruits and veggies, grains and legumes or beans, mostly whole foods, which just means kind of how it appears in nature, how Mother Nature made it. A lot of people say, if I'm not eating meat, where would I get my protein? And here are some plant-based proteins, largely beans, lentils. Tofu is considered a whole food. Edamame are the little green beans you see there, and tempeh. These are considered whole foods. And if we think about trying to incorporate them into that balanced plate we saw, we'd say, well, let's get a grain, our tortilla, some protein from the beans, some fruits and veggies. And what we're making here is just a black bean taco. It doesn't have to be difficult or complicated. It's really just assembly. Another example is this is some brown rice with some grilled tofu and veggies, kind of a shish kebab thing. So we've got grain, protein from the tofu, produce from the veggies. To make a change to plant-based eating, you need to embrace taking the meat out and embrace some plant proteins. And the most concentrated plant proteins are here. The legumes, soy foods like tofu, tempeh. We can use some of the meat analogs or fake meats like veggie burgers, veggie dogs. They're not necessarily as high fiber and nutrient rich, but they do have a place. If we're doing a backyard barbecue and we want a hot dog on the grill, okay. So we need to embrace these foods a little bit. These are some of those meat analogs, or what we're going to call fake meat. Veggie burgers, brats, chick strips, crumbles, even deli slices. So if sometimes for people, the first step is just trading something they know for something new like this, a look-alike. If we think about that balanced plate, here's a black bean burger. Again, a half a plate of veggies, a little bit of potato for starch there to get that balanced plate. The dairy replacements are the largest growing segment in the food market right now for plant foods. They do tend to have a little fat, but the Ripple that you see there is a pea protein milk along with the Silk soy milk. Those are great protein sources, or some of the others are not real rich protein, but they are just dairy replacements. There are yogurts, cream cheeses, sour cream, ice creams, and so on. So really you can get the flavor and texture, the foods that you like without giving up anything. So it's just a sample of it. It's some granola with some dried fruit, a plop of vegan yogurt on there, and some berries to top it off. I love taking pictures of restaurant foods. It's always a beautiful presentation. So this is egg replacements. Again, lots to choose from. Depends on what you're making. The just egg in the bottom corner there is a liquid. If you're baking, making pancakes, something like that, it's very easy to use the liquid. The others are mostly powders that you would mix water with to create an egg substitute. You could use even the silken tofu or just applesauce in a cake mix or something, depending on how you're trying to use it, but they're out there. This is a sample of actually a tofu scramble. So it's a few veggie breakfast potatoes, a tofu scramble instead of an egg scramble with lots of veggies in there, piece of toast. So there's my whole grain. I've got my protein, a little bit of veggie in there. So it's easy to do, or it sure doesn't have to be complicated if I think about that balanced plate. And some strategies to consider if you're thinking about maybe moving toward plant-based. We talk about Meat-Free Monday. That's actually Paul McCartney's effort, and there's a website to raise awareness about the detrimental environmental impact of animal agriculture. Sometimes people say VB6, vegan before 6. So breakfast, lunch, snacks, I'm eating vegan. At dinner, I'm going to have a plant-based meal, but maybe a little bit of animal protein there. You can do a vegan meal of the day. Like I'm going to have, instead of breakfast of bacon and eggs, I'm going to try a peanut butter toast or a vegan yogurt. Start with vegan breakfast. And if that works, try some vegan lunches and move forward that way. Or eating plant-based at home and then not worrying so much when you go out. Sometimes it's easy to just start by replacing dairy with some substitutes. Replace one food and kind of see how that goes. Veganuary, again, it's a worry right at the end, but you might try a week of let's try plant-based eating for a week and see how it goes. Or just go vegetarian for a week or go vegan for a week and see how it works. Give it a try. Some people ask about the nutrients, and really, and I usually say, you can get what you need if you're looking closely at the foods, but I usually do recommend supplementing B12 just as a safety net. And in Minnesota, vitamin D, we can't get out in the sun too much on a day like this. So, but otherwise, calcium and iron are in plant foods. So they're out there. If you're wondering more about the nutrients, here are some resources that I might suggest. And if you wanted to start with one book, I recommend this, The Vegan Starter Kit by Dr. Neil Barnard. I think it's $10 online, easy to get. The Becoming Vegan and Vegetarian are a little more reference book types. The Food Revolution, A Diet for a Small Planet are oldies but goodies about this world responsibility, environment, and resources. Vegan Starter Kit is a simple guide to kind of how to eat healthfully plant-based, and it does have some recipes. If I had one cookbook with me, it would be Vegan on the Cheap there by Robin Robertson. If you're not much of a cook, 4-ingredient vegan is pretty simple, just assembly of ingredients. Diabetes references too here that I sometimes use or recommend. Pinterest is a great place for recipes too. And I think that's the end. So let's jump to questions, Rebecca, if we're
Okay.
that. And my email is there too. If somebody has a question we don't get to, they can, of course, email me. Okay. So
We had some
website.
issues with it turns out people aren't able to, with the settings in Zoom, people aren't able to copy the links. But Alex said, just so everybody knows, Alex said he would add those to the YouTube. And if you want, you could post maybe we could add your email address there as well.
Sure. Yeah.
You're
The website is move, MOVE to the number 2 VEG.com, move to veg.com. So if you go there, there's a contact sheet, or
Okay.
Suzy at SUZY at move to veg.com. So,
Okay.
yeah, let me get out of here.
This is from Myra. She said, very compelling data and info. I currently occasionally eat fish and rarely chicken, organic from Costco. No red meat. I might have to now go more vegetarian. The hardest thing for me to give up is cheese, especially feta.
Yeah.
And giving up coffee creamer is also difficult.
Okay. And cheese is the number one thing that I hear people say that's kind of their last barrier, as they're going. I will say that the vegan cheeses are getting better all the time. There is now a vegan feta out there, or there are recipes to make your own from tofu with a little seasoning. It's not quite the same. Sometimes if that's getting in the way, or somebody would like to make that change, the best advice is take a week away from cheese, just take a break, and then try the vegan. They're not exactly the same. So I don't think we're going to fool anybody. But sometimes just taking a break and then trying the plant-based ones gives your tongue and taste buds a chance to kind of. But yeah, good efforts. Good efforts.
So there's a lot of questions coming up now.
Sure, I'm sure.
So Bill and Ruth Davini asked, could you speak to Impossible Burger?
Oh, yeah. People, let's say this, the Impossible Burger, my understanding is that it was created not really for the plant eating community, but for meat eaters who are trying to reduce. And I think most people who have tasted it would say, wow, I can't, it tastes like meat. So that was the intention. It has less environmental impact. It's not made from animals, so it does have a lower environmental impact. It's super high fat, very high fat. I think 19 grams or so, 20 grams of fat in there. It's not a whole food. I would call it a compassionate and environmentally friendly choice. It's not the healthiest plant food out there because it is high fat, low fiber, processed. Let's call it processed. But if you're out at the backyard barbecue and you're going to grill one up, they taste pretty good. It depends very much on someone's individual health goals, whether or not that might be something they'd want to include because of the high fat, low fiber. But they're yummy. I mean, yeah.
Great presentation. This is from Kelly. Great presentation. Learned so much. You mentioned soy milk. How should we think about almond milk and oat milk in comparison to soy milk as non-dairy alternatives? Pros, cons.
Good question. So, soy milk and Ripple milk, which is made, Ripple is from pea protein. They're high protein and that they're equivalent to a glass of dairy milk. They have about 8 grams of protein and 8 ounces of Ripple or soy. Traditionally, the almond milk, hemp milk, rice milks, oat milks of the world have not had any protein, but some of the products are adding some pea protein to ramp up their protein content. Other than that, it's just a matter of taste. The oat and soy and Ripple are, to my palate, a little thicker. I like the oat coffee creamer. The person who asked about the coffee creamer, I like the oat or soy coffee creamers because they're thicker and richer. A rice milk is like a skim milk, very thin, pretty tasteless. If we were making soup or something, we might use an unsweetened rice milk or unsweetened almond because they're thinner and have a little less flavor. So, yeah.
So one more,
Mhm.
oh, can you please speak to the reports that speak to the concerns over an abundance of soy protein, specifically in men? And
Mhm.
it seems like this used to be an issue with women, but not,
Right.
it sounds like that's been debunked.
Yes, thanks for asking. There used to be a handout that came from the Vegetarian Nutrition Practice Group, and I didn't use it because the first thing this handout about soy intake said was a study of 2 men, and I thought, oops, that's not a study. That's a prank, right? Two men is not a study, a research. And they ate, a couple pounds of soy product a day, and they had some fat tissue develop. So that's not the research we want. For both men and women, the health benefits that have been identified around soy intake are cholesterol lowering. Again, it's a good plant protein, no cholesterol, lower fat, and so on. So there are benefits for both men and women. There's no evidence, reliable, repeatable, real evidence saying that there's anything wrong with men or boys eating soy. For all of us, 3 servings a day is considered a safe, healthy benefit to our meal pattern. So that could be like a cup of soy milk, a couple ounces of tofu in a stir fry, and some edamame on a salad or something. So 3 servings a day of soy is actually beneficial, considered not risky or harmful or anything like that. And you're right, with the women, breast cancer risk is, especially breast cancer recurrence, the research would say at this point that it's lower for those who do consume soy. So I say, unless your oncologist tells you that it is not okay for you, then it is.
Well, Suzy, thank you so much. We need to wrap up. And it was inspiring, informative, really great to hear from you. And thanks for your work.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. I'm sorry, I know the questions, I don't know if we got them answered, but please feel free to email me directly, and I'm happy to answer. Hopefully you just planted a seed and people can go dig a little deeper,
I think
read a little more. Thank you.
Spread a lot of seeds.
Okay.
So I want to let
So nice to meet you.
remind everyone that next week, Sue Leaf is a